Thank you for listening to the Drunk GM podcast. I'm going to be talking about tabletop role-playing games, and hopefully today I can prove my love for gaming is stronger than my love of beer. Hey everyone, thanks for being here. It's Dan Cook, and tonight we have a special guest who you may know from some of the previous episodes. He was a regular on the Many Savage Worlds podcast, which is now still part of the lineup, and there'll be more episodes coming soon. And it's Nathan Carman. He just recently started GMing for me in a private game. Super fun. But tonight we're going to talk about a part of Nathan that some of you may know about, and we're hoping to learn a little bit more. And that would be Tricky Troll Games, which is the publishing name or publishing company that Nathan uses to produce some supplements. And I'll let him tell you a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I've been doing Tricky Troll Games for about 2 years now. Started out, I wasn't a Savage Worlds licensee when I started out, just producing little adventure seed tables for fantasy games. And then I did some bestiaries for the Black Hack RPG. But Savage Worlds has always been my go-to system at home. So I applied for a license with a bestiary, snagged that license. But yeah, most of what we do, it's mostly me. I have an editor, but other than that, it's primarily me. I occasionally hire out freelancers. But I primarily do, I would say, gaming aids more than full settings for Savage Worlds. So bestiaries and racial supplements, and I have a bunch of mini settings as well that I've done that really facilitate, I think, my gaming style. Like 20-something page mini setting is really all I want or need to game master personally. And I know I'm not alone. I've had quite a few people say, "Hey, this is awesome! Like I've been running this," which is really cool. So yeah, that's kind of what we do as of right now, and we're always looking to expand and build. But yeah, hopefully I'll do a much bigger Savage Worlds setting here down the road too. So
awesome. Yeah, I know we talked a little bit privately about your inspiration to do some bigger things, which I think is great, and we're looking forward to it. And if you ever do something really big, we'll have you back on. You can talk about it a little bit. So you started with some supplemental stuff for other systems because now you're primarily a Savage Worlds licensed publisher. But when you started writing for these other companies, I guess before that, did you have a background in writing? Is that something I see a lot of writers come from, like journalism, things like that. So I wonder about how you got really started. A lot of people, myself included, we like the idea of creating this content because as GMs, we create all the time. But then to actually sit down and get it organized and polished up enough to really be put out there to the masses, that takes a lot of dedication, a lot of work. But so the question I have for you is, how did you get started with writing? Is it something you studied, or did you just say that you were going to go for it?
So, excuse me. For me, it was actually a bit of both. I've always been writing. In high school, I wrote a comic book with a friend of mine. It didn't go anywhere, but we did it. And I did a lot of writing before that too. I have a strong background in theater. I studied in a program for theater. It was for high schoolers, but it was essentially your first year of college as a theater major. I did a lot of that kind of character development, character building sort of things. And I think, so my bachelor's degree is in theology and philosophy. So yeah, but I have a minor in communications. So a lot of what I did with that, did a lot of classes with that. That was helpful. And actually that covered some like basic layout classes too, which ended up being really helpful for Tricky Troll. So yeah, it was always kind of like in the back of my mind. And then I actually did publish, I got published 2 fantasy novels for like middle school age kids. And those were fun, weren't as fulfilling as I was expecting. And at that time, I was GMing a ton. I'd been GMing Savage Worlds for a couple of years. Had come from a Pathfinder background before that. And I just felt like games like Savage Worlds and like games, which I would call medium, I'd say it's like a medium crunch level, and even lighter games, I felt like, hey, I could actually produce stuff for this kind of thing. And had a lot of encouragement from my wife, and friends were just like, dude, you really should write some of these things down that you run for us. And so I just decided to put together some stuff. So my background in writing really is just kind of basically I experimented with everything until I landed on tabletop RPGs, which felt right. Particularly setting building just feels right.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's some things I didn't know about you, even though we've talked quite a bit, besides things that have been on the podcast privately. And that's really cool. Actually, I'm gonna have to Google you if you publish books already, and see what I can find. So we'll do a book review.
I will say both of the books are out of print at the moment. I was not happy with the publisher that had them, so I let the contract run out. But I do plan on getting those back out there somehow.
Well, we talked a little bit about your background in writing, but let's talk about the other half of the background, and that's the background in role-playing games.
Yeah.
I've had you as a player in like really short games for the podcast, about an hour long. We've never got to really delve into a real game together until, well, recently. Now you're GMing a game and I'm the player, which has been super fun. We only had one session as of the time that we're recording this right now, but like it was so fun. And we called it the end of the session, and I was like, man, I want to keep going. But it was a good stopping point for what time it was at night, and but I was really excited to get into it. So
that's always good to hear.
yeah. But when did you start? How did you find role playing games?
I didn't play any RPGs until college. That was mostly due to, well, there's a lot of that, like, growing up, I had a lot of friends. We were all nerds, but we were never that nerdy, right? Like, that was the kind of things that we all said, we would never be that nerdy. Which is pretty insulting in hindsight, but at the time I didn't know better. And then in college, I had a friend who was like, hey, you should really check this out. So I did. The game that I was in wasn't a great first experience, but I loved the idea, and I didn't want to stop. So I started running, like I didn't even know what I was doing, and I just started running games. And at the time, the only game I knew was Dungeons & Dragons 3.5, which is pretty rules heavy, and I was just like chucking things out the window and just doing what I wanted. And my players had fun. Like they didn't even know I was chucking stuff, so who cares? That's kind of where I started. And I went to Pathfinder from there. And my problem was that like most of my players were casual enough. They didn't really keep up with how the game worked. And so I felt like I was kind of doing a lot of the work for them. And I was like, okay, we need to find something that's more rules light, like at least that everyone can be on the same page. And that's when I found Savage Worlds, and all my players loved it. So I've played in games. Actually, the amount of times I've played in games has probably doubled since doing the podcast with you. Because until then, like, I was always GMing. I've been GMing for about 8 years off and on now, though, which has been great. My only regret is that I didn't find it sooner, right? So it's been a lot of fun, definitely.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's one of those great things that, GMing specifically is it's really rewarding. I think a lot of people don't take the chance. I'd like to ask you, I don't know if it's easy to pick or not, because they're all kind of your own creations, but I think I might know the answer to this question. Do you have something that you've written that is your favorite? And now it doesn't have to be your favorite to play, because I know you do a lot of other like Monster Manuals, bestiaries. So if you have one that you just think came out like really great, like visually, or mechanically, or of course one of your settings, if you just loved like the feel and flavor of it, that would be great too. But just, what have you done that you'd say this is, if somebody asked to see one thing that you've written, what would you pick?
See, those feel like two different questions to me because my favorite is probably different from what I would pick to show people. um, out of the stuff I've written, my mini settings are my favorite. I'm really proud of Sewer Rats, which was my nod to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Gargoyles, and 90s X-Men cartoons, like those three cartoons from the 90s, 80s, 90s. Kind of smushed together, but then it was also given like the gritty flavor of the original Ninja Turtles comic book, which, I mean, the first issue of that, they're literally hacking guys' limbs off. I remember being like 14 and thinking it was the coolest thing I'd ever read. I'm really proud of that one. It was a lot of fun to design and play. And my favorite, though, is Skies of Lintier, which is it's my home setting for about 6 years. It's kind of evolved. It's got big hints of Avatar: Last Airbender, as well as just like I wanted the feel of like DuckTales and Tailspin, cartoons that I grew up with. Aesthetically, it's not like those things, but just that like adventure feel, high adventure. Because that was really like, if you look at the DuckTales adventures, they're basically pulp adventures. So that was kind of like my first exposure to that kind of genre as a kid. Skies of Lintier is probably my favorite, which is a free mini setting available on RPG Now, DriveThruRPG. It's actually one I plan on expanding down the road. So it's the one that I think that my players always come back to. Like, I'll always say, like, okay, guys, like, you want to do an apocalyptic game now? Like, we're in between games. Or do you want to do sci-fi? What do you want to do? And I'll have them vote, and they always come back to Lintier. And I think it's probably because they're just as invested in it as I am, because they've been playing that long. That's usually the one that personally I'm all about. But I would definitely say, like, if I'm going to direct someone to something, I'd probably say Sewer Rats. Design-wise, that's my favorite. The one that I put together and was like, yeah, no, this works. This is a simple solution. My favorite kind of savaging of materials is to find a simple solution that covers all your bases for what you're trying to do. I think it can be really easy to add 30 new setting rules and 50 new races or whatever. You just don't need it usually. So.
Now, something that you have written that I really like, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I haven't had a chance to read everything you've done. Because it's actually quite extensive. When I looked at your whole catalog, I was like, wow, he has a lot of books out. And there's a lot of, and they're not all Savage Worlds. You have some other ones, and I forget the name, so once I pass it back over, it's the sci-fi one there. I think you know which one I'm talking about. But I really like you have the Beast Folk. I guess it'd be like a companion. And now, if I'm not mistaken, these are racial companions where you have... Now, maybe you can fill us in, because I believe you have a couple of these available now, a couple volumes. And are they pre-made races, or is it expanded racial creation rules? I know the pictures on the covers are really awesome. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about those, because I find them really intriguing, that instead of just being like monsters and adversaries, it really expands player options, which can be a lot of fun.
Yeah, so the racial guides that I put together, those are all playable races. All of them are balanced at +2. And if you're unfamiliar with that, that just means they're equivalent to a human's power level, for those listening. So yeah, basically I have 2 Beast Folk books, because I was seeing a lot of people say, like, there's not enough anthropomorphic stuff. And I agree. I love the Redwall books, Miss Mantle. There's a lot of good, especially fantasy material out there. I have very fond memories, though, of like Star Fox 64 and stuff like that growing up. Absolutely, I wanted to produce those for that reason, because there wasn't much. So between the two, there's 40 available races that way. In total, I actually counted between all my products. I've written over like 140 races, I think. Yeah, I have 2 volumes of Bespoke of mythical creatures, which is like centaurs, minotaurs, those sort of things. But there's also like kitsune and other stuff like that. I've written, I did like a mutants one, kind of like monsters, and aliens. I also did an aliens one. So, and those are all like easy on the printer. They're like black and white line art. I designed them to just print them out and play with them. They don't come with like monster stat blocks. It's strictly player material, but it does go into like archetypes where you might find these kind of creatures, that sort of thing. As for the setting, I've done 2 system agnostic settings. The one you're talking about is called Astonishing Worlds, which is heavily inspired by 1950s comics, Planet Comics in particular, as well as the original Star Trek series. As a matter of fact, that was probably my favorite part of designing that, was just binge watching the original Star Trek series. And laughing the entire time. Not that I don't love it, I do, but like, you know, the effects don't hold up to today's standards, so it was really fun to watch Kirk get hit with styrofoam. But yeah, that's kind of, Astonishing Worlds was design-wise, I wanted to see if I could do a system-neutral setting. And so really I was just kind of studying what other people had done to make it work. Oftentimes when I produce something, it's mostly a challenge to myself. Hey, maybe I could do that. Let's see how I could go about that. So Astonishing Worlds was, how can I do this system agnostic? So the races are kind of general. Like you have near human. Near human covers, excuse me, I'm getting over a cold. So near human covers like Spock, for example. He's got pointed ears. If you go into his physiology, there's a lot more going on. But on the surface, he's almost human. And so I basically even say in the book, like, yeah, you could just run these as humans and just give them a different aesthetic if you want with whatever system you're using. And so there's kind of that philosophy throughout the whole book. I talk about how, like, hey, you don't actually, you have are far-range teleporters. And the reason I did that was, A, it gets you to the action right away. But B, GMs don't have to mess with rocket ship rules if they don't want to, whatever system they're using, because it's system neutral, so you don't want to mess with that kind of stuff too much. They can throw it in if they want, but they have an out if they don't want to. So yeah, that's Astonishing World is probably one of the better, like one of the products that has done really well for me, which is great. Produced a couple of supplements for that as well too.
Yeah, that caught my eye when right before we started the campaign you're running. You sent us over and said, "Hey, look at my settings. We'll run one of them." So I took a look at the store on DriveThruRPG, and I opened up the whole thing though. I didn't filter it by setting because I had kind of honestly forgotten that you had done this stuff like pre-Savage World stuff because we mostly talk about Savage Worlds together. So I found the Astonishing Worlds and I was like, oh wow, I got, read the little blurb and the cover is really cool. You see the picture and like, that's what you think of. It was great. And I was like, oh, we should run this. And you were like, oh, well, if you actually read anything that the GM sends you, like every other player, you would know that's not Savage Worlds. So we ended up settling on a setting of yours called Husk, and the cover was really cool. It made me think of Starship Troopers. And it turns out it's not quite as actiony. It's more of a survival inspired game, and we're just getting into it, but really cool. It's short, it's a quick read, has some cool monsters. They're not to give too much away, but the cover has a big bug, so they're big bugs. And it's going to be really fun. But yeah, I was really drawn into the Astonishing Worlds or Astounding Worlds, and I'm just going to stop saying the name, and maybe when you say which one it is after this, I'll go back and edit it and then edit you out so it sounds like I was right the whole time. But
yeah, Astonishing Worlds, close enough. Astonishing, astounding, it all works. Yeah, that one was definitely really fun. Well, and actually, the only reason I have not done a Savage Worlds port is because between Flash Gordon and Slipstream, I feel like that's pretty well covered. It is more 1960s Star Trek, I think, but the art is more pulpy. And so I think it kind of, because it blends those things, I think most people would just be like, oh, another Flash Gordon. So I just haven't done it for that reason. But it definitely is different. It has its own feel to it. Different, very different feel. As for like covers and stuff, so a lot of what I do, because it's a one-man team, is I'll get art from various artists, and I will splice them together in Photoshop and make a cover. And that's typically what I do. I'd say 90% of what I do is self-taught. And that's really just like, if you want to be a designer, I think this is something I actually meant to say based on what you were saying earlier. You're right. Most GMs want to design. They want to write. And I think the reason for that is because GMing is just a short hop, skip, and a jump away from writing. GMing is storytelling, and storytelling is writing. Like, it's all connected. And so like there's that need and that desire to put it out there for others. And so I think I've actually noticed this a lot. I've had a lot of people that want to break into the indie publishing scene will contact me via email, and they say like, what did you do? How can I go about this? And it's always really funny to me because there seems to be this like glass ceiling that I guess for me, I just completely shattered. I just went, oh, I want to do this. And I Googled it and I figured it out. And so when all these people are like, oh, well, like, how long did you take to get in and do this? And I was like, dude, I just jumped into the deep end and half drowned, but I figured it out. So like, you can too. And I think that's important to note is like, if you want to do it, you can do it. You can totally do it. It just depends on how much you're willing to pick up. I did a lot of movie editing growing up, and it is not the same thing at all, but layout is about as tedious. And so that kind of, I had the patience already to figure it out. And you see publishers like Richard Woolcock does fantastic work, and he's completely self-taught. If you're listening, I'm always willing to, absolutely willing to talk to you about it and get you in the right direction. You can email me at trickytrollgames@gmail.com. I'm more than willing to hear what you have to say or your questions. But yeah, it's one of those things where I just kind of dove in and I did it. I was just like, well, I don't really have a complete front cover, so I'm going to make it. And I did. And that's just kind of what you have to do, I think. There's no degree for what we do, right? Like, there's absolutely, this is not something you can study 4 years in college for. So, at least not RPG design in particular. So, I just kind of got to figure it out as you go. I also Googled, I found this helpful. If you're interested in this kind of stuff, you can Google a lot of panels at Gen Con. Like, you can watch them on YouTube. And there's a lot of fantastic designers that will give their advice. And that was very helpful starting out as well.
Wow, that's awesome. That's a great resource. Thank you so much. I think you're a great person to have on. And like I said, I'm going to talk with other writers. Hopefully, I've already spoke to one person who we have to work on some scheduling. But I think you're a great example, Nathan, because you're very humble and, you do so much yourself that I think you're a great example of an indie writer. I would say, just from my own point of view, is even if you can't get the license from Pinnacle, you can always do a fan license, and you can't sell it, but you can put your name out there. People will get back to you with feedback, and it might not all be nice. Unfortunately, it's the internet. But you might also get other publishers responding to you and saying, hey, here's some really helpful tips.
Well, and now Pinnacle just announced the swag license. So that will be available for people as well, which is cool. I'm all for it. I think that's really cool. I think it'll probably help shatter that glass ceiling a little bit for a lot of people. So yeah, that'll be really cool to see. Yeah, it's true. It's really hard. I think at first it's overwhelming. It's really overwhelming to see people produce these like fantastic books. And I look at like some of this stuff and I'm just like, dang, like they must have like 30 guys doing this. You find it's like one guy and another guy part-time. And he's just like doing it in his basement, but it's like this fantastic book. Which really just is a testament to the passion of gamers, to see like what they put together. But yeah, like I definitely am indie. I'll probably will always be indie on some level. But I do hope to expand for sure. and I'm really anxious to see what people come up with for swag as well. But you're right, like do it under the fan license, anything like that, and people will say stuff. There's always someone, but it really doesn't matter. Which is funny because I'm a very sensitive person, so I take that to heart when I see something. I'm like, oh, they didn't. But like after a while, I'm just like, you know, who freaking cares? Because it's important to understand that like what is not a good game to one person is amazing to another, right? And so there's always someone out there, and just because one person doesn't like it doesn't mean anything. And you look at what Pinnacle does, and they'll get like terrible reviews from some people, and I'm sitting there going, "Are you kidding me? This is gold! Like this is an amazing game." So I think it all just depends. It's all up to opinion. So all that to say, don't want to get you down. Absolutely, you can do it. You really can do it. You just, as long as you're willing to put the time into it. I would say when I started out, my first son was my wife was pregnant with my first kid, and I was probably working on that stuff a good 40 plus hours a week. Now that was mostly because at the time she was like, dude, just do it. Like my wife was great about it. It was like, we're making money off of what I'm doing. Just get started. So I was able to take a couple months and do that before the kid was born. And now that I have two kids, I just stay at home. And then when they're asleep, I write. So I'm a stay-at-home dad, and I do that on the side. And yeah, it's pretty crazy how much you can get done when you know you only have 2-hour window before the stinkers wake up. You know, I realize now I don't even know if you asked a question. I just started rambling. So I apologize.
No, don't apologize. That's great. Yeah, I only had one more question that came to mind, and of course, welcome to talk about anything else that you had that maybe I didn't ask. But I was wondering if you had anything coming up in the future that you're aware of. I know that we've talked and you're doing some writing, but I don't know how close you are, that if you're even ready to say what it is or isn't yet, because I know it can be a complicated process. But if you had anything coming up or plans for the future you'd like to share with everybody, I know I'm interested to hear what you're working on next.
So, yeah, absolutely. I'm in the layout stages of a project currently, which I won't say yet, but it will be a fun companion or guide of sorts. I actually have a guy that did most of the writing for it besides me, which was nice. I love writing, but that was nice to have someone else working on the project. But I also have like a ton of ideas. I would say at any given time, I have 6 products I want to do. And then if the idea really sticks it out, that's how I know it should be a thing, you know? And so some of my other ideas, something I would love to do is I would like to do a complete game of my own at some point. Probably a hack of the Black Hack with a setting in mind. I really like the Black Hack. I've done a few supplements for that, and I think because it's under the open game license, there's a lot of potential there. But I've been waiting for the second edition to drop, which should be in like a week, I think. Yeah, I would love one of my ideas. I mean, this is really early on. I have nothing written down for this, but one of the ideas I really want to do is a Redwall inspired anthropomorphic fantasy game that would be using probably the Black Hack. So old school Renaissance feel with badger warriors and rabbit archers and that sort of thing. And I have some ideas for that. Something I really want to do in general is just have a complete game in one book for a pretty cheap price that everyone can pick up and play at the table. I think there needs to be more of that. The accessibility factor, I think, is big. And gaming as a whole is a pretty cheap hobby, I think, unless you really get into minis and terrain. I think it's a pretty cheap hobby. So I want to definitely help with that. When you look at games like Basic Fantasy, that's like, that guy makes nothing off of that. $5 for the core book. It's like 150, 200 pages. And you're mostly paying for cost of print on that. And he's created a fantastic community. It's cool because there's kids playing RPGs now that weren't because of that. So I'd definitely like to do something more accessible and a complete game in and of itself. I will say too, I mentioned earlier, I am working on a expanded Skies of Lintier. It will probably end up being somewhere in the like medium-sized setting range. But when I say that, I mean it's really inspired by Old School Sandbox. So it will have a ton of generators for Old School Sandbox play. But yeah, that kind of feel. Most of my stuff tends to be more toolkits anyway. So, and I prefer settings that function like that. Like if it has a bunch of tables in the back, I'm like, yes. I'd rather have that than an adventure personally, which I know I'm in the minority for that. But that's just me. But yeah, so Skies of Lintier will be bigger. I've got more edges planned. Tweaking some new setting rules. Definitely waiting for the new Savage Worlds edition to drop as well. So I'd honestly say I'd probably be farther in those two projects if it wasn't for the fact that I'm waiting on new editions of both of those games that I want to base them off of. Which is one of the reasons I want to hack a game myself and make it myself so I can just do my own thing from there with it. But yeah, those are things I'm looking forward to doing. I also do have a companion coming out with lots of generators in it. Yeah, I'll probably wait on going into more details on that. But honestly, expect probably here in a few weeks, I'll probably drop some more hints online. So as I get closer to the layout stages.
That's awesome. And I think I know what it is because I think you shared it privately with us. So actually, it is really cool. And anybody who wants to follow Tricky Troll, they're on Facebook, Tricky Troll Games, I believe. And of course, you can find Nathan on the Savage Worlds Facebook page. He's on there and he shares his new releases and shares his wisdom with people that need sage advice.
Yeah, we'll call it wisdom, sure.
Well, if you show up on a Facebook page, I hope you can't expect too much. But
you can always contact me at trickytrollgames@gmail.com as well. I check that all the time, so I'll get it probably within an hour of you messaging me. So
that's awesome. Yeah, you've always been like we communicate regularly, but we've never worked together. But I'd say professional. We work together on the podcast. I mean, I'd consider us friends now, but we're not friends from before the show. We started working together when I started the show, and you've been great to work with. So if anybody would like to ask Nathan a question, feel free to reach out to him because genuinely really, really nice person.
I try.
And actually, Anna wanted me to say thank you for GMing for her as her first time. You were super nice and helpful. So
yeah, absolutely. I absolutely love GMing for new players. I usually, my wife Carmen had to scold me for a while there because I kept buying a ton of dice and giving any new player a set of dice when they got to my table. And she's like, dude, you can't drop another 20 on a big bag of dice. You need to stop that. Because I kept bringing new people to the table. I absolutely love playing new gamers. And in general, I want to be helpful. I think a lot of game designers, especially in the Savage Worlds community, they're fantastic. They're all very helpful. And I don't view designers as competition. And I think a part of that is because if you want to play a gritty Ninja Turtles game, you're probably going to look at mine. If you want some cool, if you want to play some cool gangster kind of stuff, you're going to look at Wise Guys. You're going to look at what Just Insert Imagination is doing. And so, because we're not doing the same things, there's really no need to compete. If a gamer wants a setting, they're going to go after that setting. It doesn't really matter. And I think because there isn't really a degree for what we do, I think a lot of designers are willing to help because they wish they had help when they started. That's definitely one of the reasons I like to help is because I'm just this would have been so nice to know 2 years ago when I thought this was easy. So yeah, definitely hit me up if you want to talk. Anything like that, absolutely. And also, it has been a blast running the game for you guys. I'm very excited about the next session. I need to think it through more than I have, but that's pretty normal. So, yeah, I'm anxious to see what happens.
No, I'll say as a GM, I always improvise, and I feel like, oh man, it feels like I don't know what I'm doing. But my players always either they're too nice and they won't tell you that you did a terrible job, which may be the case sometimes. But I am GMing for Bobby right now, and I think he would probably let me know how he felt in a good way. But
yeah, he'd probably tell you.
Yeah, so maybe it's not as obvious as I feel like it is. But and you definitely, like, I don't know how much of your first session was improvised with us, but it felt like really fluid and good.
Probably about 90%.
Oh yeah, first session's always easy to write, and then after that, it's you just got.
No, it was about 90% improvised.
Oh,
yeah,
wow, yeah, no, it was very good. It had a good flow. But I want to ask you a question because I'm not familiar with it, and I think it's interesting to see what other people like to play. But I was wondering if you could tell me about the Black Hack. You said you've written some stuff for that, and is that like a old school, like I know a lot of people are reskinning, like second edition D&D is like a really popular one that you see with the OSR games.
So what Black Hack does that I love is it's not really a reskin. It takes a house rule that you see in OSR all the time and just makes it main mechanic. So with a lot of OSR games, or especially like the actual like basic expert D&D, what a lot of GMs did for like ability checks, there wasn't really rules for ability checks. And so they just said, I don't know, roll a d20, and if you get under your attribute, you succeed. And David Black, the guy that made Black Hack, went, yeah, that's what I'm going to do. That's going to be the core mechanic of the game. So there are no, if you're familiar with D&D, with your typical D20 system, there are no typical bonuses. 18 is not a +4 or +3 or whatever. It's an 18. It's really powerful because if you roll a d20 and get a 17 or less, you succeed. But that's the core mechanic. It's like, what, Black Hack's like $2, I think. It's like a 20-page book. The new edition, I think, which is out next week, is like 150 pages. And it has a lot of tables. He's reworked some of the stuff. There was definitely a few kinks in the first edition here and there that a lot of people hacked and changed anyway. But yeah, it's got your 4 basic like dungeon crawling classes. They start with a few basic abilities. It does include advantage and disadvantage, which you would find in D&D 5th edition. So roll 2d20, take the higher result, or if you have disadvantage, or sorry, in this case, roll 2d20, take the lower result as an advantage. And high as a disadvantage. And it works really well. And that's kind of how, like, quote unquote skills work. The rogue or thief character automatically has advantage with stealth and things like that. So it's very rules light, very straightforward. It's a lot of fun. I've done a few bestiaries, a magic item book, and an NPC book for it. And it was all really easy to do because your monster stat block is literally like, this is how many hit dice it has, and this is its special ability, the end. It is pretty compatible with a lot of old school adventures too, because you can just, as long as you know the ability scores of the NPCs and stuff, you can just kind of go with it from there. Well, and actually GMs don't roll d20s at all. If I were to say this monster is attacking you, maybe I've got like a warrior defending, he would just roll his strength to defend. And if the monster has more hit dice than he has levels, he would add the difference to his roll. So if I've got like a hit dice 2 ghoul versus a level 1 warrior, the warrior adds +1 to his roll, which is bad, right? Because you want to get under. So there is kind of this mechanic set in that tougher, it kind of tells the players what they're facing. But if they go up against a 10 hit dice dragon and they're like level 2s, and the GM's like, yeah, add +8 to your roll, they're like, oh crap, we're screwed. So yeah, it's all pretty intuitive. The only thing the GM rolls is damage, which is kind of cool. I know some people hate that, but I love that because I can focus on the story.
I think that is really cool. I think with a lot of OSR games, it has that sort of old. It's often attributed to Gary Gygax, the adversarial GM, where it's your job to make it as hard as possible and kill your players. But a game like that, you're not rolling for a lot of these things. So it's really based off of you could put really hard monsters, I guess. I mean, if you want to kill your players, you can always do it anyways. But I think eliminating some of the GM roles, kind of changes that feel a little bit. So I think that's pretty cool. It's either, like you're probably going to win or you're not. And like maybe you learn to run away a little bit more too. Sounds like a fun game. That's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's really cool, and it scratches that D&D itch for me, because sometimes I am like, man, I miss classes. I'm always playing in Savage Worlds, but occasionally I'm like, there's something nostalgic about classes. And I grew up playing video game RPGs, right, which are heavily inspired by that, especially Japanese RPGs. Yeah, I would love an Anthro game based off of that kind of mechanic, and I've got some cool ideas for that. And I'll see what the new edition brings to the table. What I can steal, and all that good stuff, which is nice. That's another great thing for designers, is how many things are in open game licenses. That's insane that these people are just like, here, take my stuff, go for it. I don't care. Like, it just is a testament to designers and how awesome they are, that they're just like, sure, I just want people to play my game. So if you change it massively, that's fine. Here's the rules. You can sell it. I don't care. A lot of cool stuff like that. But yeah, I'm going on a tangent now. That's the Black Hack in a nutshell.
Yeah, I think it's great that, like you said, the game companies are doing this now, inviting more people to create content for them and giving incentive. They're allowing it to be sold by most of these people. Mm-hmm. And now with the new changes to Savage Worlds, they're allowing more people to sell their product, and it's going to be less overseen with these different levels. Anybody wants to know more, I'd recommend you go to the Pinnacle site, and we can talk a little bit about it. I haven't done much research. I don't want to get too deep into it, but you can create like the fan content, but now you'll be able to sell it on its own like marketplace, which I think is really awesome. You can see a lot of really cool stuff coming up, and Pinnacle, I feel like, is encouraging more people to create content.
Yeah,
because the easier it is, the more people that are going to do it.
Right. Yeah, well, and a lot of third-party publishers, a lot of licensees are now adding their settings to Swag, so people can make adventures and stuff for their settings, which is really cool. And it's something, if I eventually make a big enough setting, I would love to do that, because I think that's awesome. But yeah, it's pretty cool to see Pinnacle take this step, and I think it's an encouragement for more game designers. And well, like, designers are essentially the future of our hobby, right? So if we have more of them, that's perfectly fine with me.
Yeah, I thought it was really great what you said about other designers not being competition, because you guys are creating different settings. You're all creating for the same game system, but I mean, gamers are game addicts. Like, you don't game a little bit, like, it sucks you in. Then you want to buy every cool setting you see, and as long as they're unique, it is still a very viable like marketplace.
Right.
So I thought that was really great.
Yeah, like Savage Worlds has like 4 or 5 sword and sorcery settings at this point. But most of them bring something different to the table. They're not all the same, which is cool. It's cool to see that. Like Beasts and Barbarians, I know is very, to what I understand, I'm not huge into sword and sorcery, but to what I understand, it's very Conan-esque. But then you have people bring in other things and to theirs, and so there's always that different feel, which is really cool. And then you like Lankmar's license and stuff. That's really cool. Lankmar's great. I love Lankmar. So yeah, I don't know where I was going with that, but and I've also seen too, though. I've seen some products. The guys that do the Fantastic Pulp book. It's so good. Thrilling Tales. Thrilling Tales for Savage Worlds, like, the guy that designed that was basically like, yeah, like, this is just standard pulp. But the reason we did that was because everyone was doing a twist on everything else. So our twist was just doing standard pulp. So and that brought people to him, though, because it was like, hey, this is a really sweet toolkit. And it is. It's a fantastic book. I love it. I cannibalize that thing all the time. So yeah, there's definitely, if you find your niche, I think you're good to go as a designer, particularly with Savage Worlds. Mini settings is kind of the thing I've been doing, but I'd love to see other people do it too. I've seen a couple actually more recently, which is really cool. and I'm sure we'll have more with Swag. So that'll be really cool to see.
Yeah, it's a really smart approach, especially for someone who's starting out with less experience, maybe like you, doing your own research. You don't have to feel the pressure and that heavy weight of putting out 200 pages. You can put out something a lot more reasonable, and still great content. It leaves a lot of room. It's good for a really creative GM, and this is someone like me. I think a lot of people who play Savage Worlds are very similar where they're older. It's usually not people's first game. They're coming to it later on after being away from gaming a lot of the time. I know I see that in the forums all the time. And most of these people that have this older experience probably have created their own adventures and written their own settings and stories. So when they're picking up a mini setting, it just works perfect because it has the framework. It gives them a good direction to get their creativity flowing. And then they have the room to run with it as far as they need to really just give it their own spin. I think it's awesome.
Right. Well, one of the reasons I did that too was I kept seeing people say, like, I'm going to mix this setting and that setting, or like, I'm trying to, I like this part of the setting, but not that. So I was like, well, why don't I just do more toolkit kind of settings that cover your cover your basic setting, but also just really give you what you need to go with. When I designed Husk Wrath of the Swarm was my first one. And that's really designed to be able to handle, like, if you want to add stuff from the Sci-Fi Companion, you can. If you want to add the insanity rules from the horror book, you absolutely can. They'd be perfect, honestly. And I just kind of left it open-ended because GMs do that anyway, right? Like, when I see a setting, I'm like, oh, I think it'd be a lot cooler with laser guns, and then I take the lasers from the Sci-Fi Companion and throw them into this fantasy setting, because why not? So really, when I was designing the setting kits, I was just like, GMs are going to do this stuff anyway, so I'm just going to give them like what they need to do what they want with it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, they're really great. So I think that takes care of my questions, and we learned some other stuff and talked about some other things that was all really great. If there's anything else you want to add about yourself, Trick Control, gaming in general, really anything at all, go right ahead, and I think we're going to wrap it up after that. But it was really great having you on, Nathan. As always, it's always a pleasure talking to you, but I learned some really interesting stuff about you, and hopefully everyone else did too.
Yeah, I can't think of anything really to add. We kind of already covered everything I would say. Yeah, just reach out if you want to talk to someone about the industry or whatever. I'm always available to talk about that. Well, within reason. I do have two little stinkers at home, but I try to make room for that. So yeah, absolutely. I think that's about it.
All right. Well, hey, thank you for being here, man. And if anyone would like to reach Nathan directly or check out his products on DriveThruRPG, links to both those things will be available in the description below. I hope you enjoyed our episode today, and if you did, let us know. You can join us on Facebook and Google+. You can reach us by email, or you can leave us a rating and review here on iTunes, which helps us out quite a bit. If you'd like to help the show more than that, you can visit our Patreon. All the information's in the description below. Cheers.